Hello there, welcome to my channel. My name is B. I am one of the creators of Witchery Academy, a life simulator set in a magical academy where you are a wizard student. You have lots of things to do. You can craft potions, you can learn spells, you have your own garden where you can grow, harvest, plant different plants. We decided to open a Patreon page so you can support us if you want to. I will leave the link below, so go and check it out and consider to support us, it helps. Today's video is gonna be very quick. It's gonna be triggers and camera transition. This camera transition, you can use it to, for example, to highlight point of views, something interesting on your level, or just as a nice way to present cameras. Let me show you what I have. We have our robot and there's a trigger right here, and as you can see there's a camera transition. When the time ends, it will go back to your player and you can keep playing. So this is gonna be very simple. I basically have a blueprint trigger camera spectator, which is a trigger, and another actor right here, which is just an actor to set the position and orientation of that camera transition, the endpoint. For this trigger, I use something that I use all the time, which is a basic trigger. So when I need a trigger, what I will do is create the basic class, which mainly contain a box trigger and the events on begin overlap and end overlap. It also contains a few functions like enable trigger, disable trigger, and a reference to the player or the element that enters the trigger, so I can have it in the tiles. And the trigger camera spectator extends from that one, so it will take all the basic functionality from the parent class, and it will add this camera transition with some times, and you will see. Shall we start? Yes, let's do this. Let's take a look first at the blueprint trigger camera spectator. It has nothing really because it's just like a basic trigger, and it extends from trigger camera spectator, and as you can see, all of these are those basic elements that I was talking about on the basic trigger. And it's basically a trigger. It's a box with a mesh. I'm not using any kind of mesh, but it can be useful if you want to, for example, have something on the environment that you're gonna grab, so you can have a basic static mesh. I always include this static mesh as a base, but maybe it's not a good idea to add it in the base class, because this is like a basic trigger, so you can decide what you think is best. This blueprint also has a few elements that you can set. We have the enable trigger. This comes from the base class and is to enable or disable the trigger, obviously. So it will, if this is set to false, it will have this with no collision, and you will see on the code. Then we have these things. These properties are for the transition of the camera. So first we have a camera transition time in, which is the time that is going to be the blend time from the start position and end position. An idle time, so how long the camera is gonna be in static. And that's the complete transition time, which is basically when the idle time ends. It will take this property will take over, and it will just have a bit of time to stop the transition, and the player will recover the controller. Let me show you now the trigger, because trigger also have this property, which is only a property that you can set on instances, not on the blueprint. So you can see it here because it has that U property made a label to set that is only instance. And I'm taking the camera spectator, which is this object with that rotation, and is the end point. You could totally use something like an F vector and an F rotator to set this instead of with an actor with code. But most of the times it's way easier if you use actors, because you can rotate the actor and it's easier. And with the tip here, you can take any kind of object, right click, and pilot camera spectator, and then you can move this whatever you want. And when you finish, you can just stop, and the object will keep that rotation and that position. Quite nice. Let's move on now to the code. I was mentioning before, this trigger extends from basic trigger. So let's go and check first basic trigger first. The basic trigger is an actor, so we can place it on the scene, and it has a root scene, a mesh, a static mesh component, and the U-box component, which is the trigger. Then we have a begin overlap for the trigger, and I haven't included the end overlap, but it will be similar. I don't need it right now, but I should add it actually. We don't need it in this tutorial. I'll probably add it for future tutorials. Then we have disable trigger, enable trigger, and this EU property to set if we want to enable this trigger right at the beginning, or well, it's also for the disable and enable. Finally, we have a reference to the main player controller, the robot, and it will be a reference that is set in begin play overlap. Nothing new here in the constructor. We just are creating all the objects, the root, that's the root component, then everything else is attached to the root component. The trigger, the U-box, has this event, which is begin overlap. If we have the end overlap as well, it will be right here. So it will be similar, just with an end overlap. And it will be on component begin overlap, if I remember correctly. The rest is very simple. The trigger is nothing else like, okay, we check if the trigger is enabled, if this is not null, and if it's not null, we check if it's the main character, which is we are good, and if it's the main character, we just get the controller and cast to a main player controller, and we are good to go. Then we have enable trigger and disable trigger. It's nothing else that a public function that says, okay, disable the trigger and disable the collision and don't overlap events. This is useful when you want to stop the trigger completely, and after you use the trigger for the first time, we don't want that trigger to work anymore in the game. Let's move on now to trigger camera spectator, which extends from basic trigger, and it has very simple things. It has that camera spectator actor and those three times. I'm gonna control these three with a timer, with the same timer, and instead of creating three different timers, what I'm gonna use is the same. And I'm gonna use this in32 transition state to check what was the current state of the camera. Next, we have a normal timer. This is just a timer to, instead of using the tick, we can use the timer handle to handle this kind of things, which is, in these cases, is better. Don't use the tick if you don't have to, and in this case, we don't need to. We always need a new function to go along with the timer. We have the begin play, and I'm overriding the begin overlap because I want to add extra functionality. Now, if we go to the trigger camera spectator, begin play, what I do is just set the first state, which is the initial state. Nothing is gonna happen. And this is the important bit. So on the beginning overlap, this will be triggered by the basic trigger. First thing, I call the parent, so I can get the reference and I can get this property set and all of that. And next is to check if this is enabled. A few null pointers checks, important. And next, okay, if we have this reference, we lock the input so we can't walk or we can use the player for a bit. We disable the trigger because in my case I don't want this trigger to be triggered any longer in this level. So we disable and we set the state to 1, which is set the camera in transition. And these two lines are very important. In order to do that blend, we can use this set view target with blend, which basically will take the camera and move it to a different actor, and is expecting an actor. That's why I need an actor, because I said previously that you can totally use a rotator and a vector, but no, it's waiting for an actor. Sorry about that, I forgot about it. But well, so we use this with the player controller, important. Then we use the float, that time float. And here we can set the type of blend, and there is different options. This one is like with easy in and easy out merged together. You can check the others. You can have easy in out, linear. So there's different options. I like this one. Next we have to set the timer. We use that timer handle that we set at the beginning, this one. We use the function, important, and we use the first time. Next thing is when this timer ends, it will call this function. And here is when we use that transition state. Very simple. First thing is to clear the timer, just in case we're not gonna use this anymore. And now we check the current state, which it will begin with 1. If it's 1, we will set to second, which is the camera being in idle for a few seconds. We create the new timer using the same timer handle, so we can reuse this logic and use this transition to just not have lots of different functions, which will be okay, but I prefer this better. It's readable, it's small, it's compact, so up to you. Same function, and this time we use camera idle time. Again, when this timer ends, it will call again this function and it will move on to the next step. And we do the same. We set the third state, 3, which is idle is completed, let's stop the transition. We do the same, we call the same we use the same timer, we call the same function with the new timer, which is complete transition time. And this is important. This means set the view target, the camera again to a new actor, in this case is the player. So we could use another blend set view target with blend and have a transition, but I decided why not, let's just reset the camera at its state and not have any transition. But you can totally do this, no problem at all. This will be the last state, so when this timer ends, it will come here and what we said, okay, transition state is the initial one, and we unlock the input and we can start playing again. And that's it for today's tutorial. Please share, like, and if you haven't subscribed yet to my channel, please do it. It helps. And also consider to support my game, which I am very, very excited about. I can't wait to show you more about that. I will post blogs on that Patreon page. I'm planning to do small videos telling what we are doing. And I'm very excited about that. You can also check my itch.io page so you can get the project files and I can have a little bit of more support. Thanks for watching and see you next time on the next video. Bye!